Close your eyes for a second and picture a caveman. Firelight flickering against cold stone walls. A family huddled together, deep underground, safe from the dark world outside. The smell of smoke trapped against rock. The sound of wind howling somewhere far above, unable to reach you. That image is burned into almost every brain on this planet. And it is almost entirely wrong. What is actually written in the ground, layer by layer, tells a very different story. One that never made it into the cartoons. So let's dig it up, literally, and find out where our ancestors really slept, ate, and built their lives. Every kid's book about prehistory shows the same scene. A stone entrance, a fire pit, animal skins on the walls. Movies do it too. Saber-toothed tigers pacing outside a rocky cavern while a tribe huddles inside. Even the word we use says it all. Caveman. Not riverman. Not plainsman. Caveman. That single word has shaped how billions of people imagine the deep past. And that image did not come out of nowhere. It traces back to a single skeleton dug up in a French cave in 1908. The skeleton belonged to an elderly Neanderthal found at a site called La Chapelle-aux-Saints. A scientist named Marcelin Boule spent 3 years studying it, then published his reconstruction in 1911. Boule reconstructed the spine as severely curved, the knees bent, the head jutting forward in a slouch. He read the low skull and heavy brow as signs of a primitive, almost ape-like mind. That single reconstruction became the template. Newspapers ran illustrations of a hunched, hairy brute, and the image spread everywhere, cave included. Decades later, other researchers went back and re-examined the same bones. The truth turned out to be far less dramatic. That particular skeleton had severe arthritis, which had distorted its posture in life. A healthy Neanderthal would have stood upright, much like we do. But by then, the stooped, cave-dwelling brute had already been living in the public imagination for 60 years. But here's the question nobody stops to ask. If ancient humans really spent their entire existence tucked inside stone chambers, where did all that time in the open world go? Hundreds of thousands of years of walking, hunting, gathering, and raising children. Did all of that just happen inside cave mouths? And if it didn't, why does almost everyone still believe it did? The answer has less to do with how ancient humans actually lived, and more to do with how archaeology itself works. Here is the brutal fact of nature behind all of it. Some materials survive the passage of time, and some do not. Caves are natural vaults. Stable temperature, low light, protection from wind and rain, which is exactly why bones, ash, and tools can sit undisturbed for tens of thousands of years. Most ancient camps were not built from stone. They were built from wood, animal hide, and woven grass, materials that rot, burn, or collapse within a single generation. So picture two ancient families. One inside a cave mouth, one camped beside a river a short walk away, in a shelter of branches and skin. Thousands of years later, the cave gives up hearths, tools, and bones stacked in neat layers. The river camp gives up almost nothing, just a scatter of stone flakes, if archaeologists even find the spot. That gap has a name. Researchers call it preservation bias, and it means the evidence was already filtered long before anyone picked up a trowel. A large survey of Upper Paleolithic sites across Europe backs this up directly. Across almost every period studied, cave and rock shelter sites vastly outnumber open-air ones in the record, with only one narrow window where the numbers even out. It is a bit like judging what people eat today by only checking what's left in a bank vault. You would conclude everyone only eats gold bars. Modern archaeologists have gotten better at working around that gap. Even when the wood and hide are long gone, soil chemistry, tiny stone flake scatters, and burnt patches in the earth can still mark exactly where a fire once burned or a hide was scraped clean. For most of the 20th century, that bias quietly wrote the textbook version of prehistory. But archaeology has gotten smarter, and researchers have finally started digging where they used to overlook completely: the open ground itself. One of the clearest examples sits in northern Israel, at a site called Ein Kashish, near the Kishon River. There is no cave here. No overhang, no stone ceiling. Just an open floodplain beside a stream. And yet, when researchers led by Ravid Eckstein excavated this site, they uncovered something remarkable. Layer after layer of Neanderthal activity, spanning roughly 70,000 to 54,000 years ago. More than 12,000 artifacts came out of the ground. Stone tools, butchered animal bones, and even Neanderthal skeletal remains. The excavated area alone stretched past 600 square meters, inside a floodplain more than 1,300 square meters wide, which is a serious footprint for a site with no walls and no roof. This was not a one-time visit. Neanderthals returned to this exact stretch of riverbank again and again, across thousands of years, napping tools, processing kills, living out in the open under the sky. The location was not random either. A confluence of a stream and a tributary, close to fresh water, shifting herds, and reliable food. That is almost certainly the pattern that repeated itself across most of human prehistory. Mobile, seasonal camps, built near rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Follow the water, and you follow the food. Follow the food, and you follow the herds. Ein Kashish is not an isolated case either. At Nesher Ramla in central Israel, another open-air Middle Paleolithic site, researchers found a deep sequence of hunting and butchery evidence inside an ancient sinkhole, far from any cave entrance. Two separate open landscapes, hundreds of kilometers apart, both showing the same thing. People were living, working, and eating out in the open, not just passing through. And this was not just a Neanderthal habit. Homo sapiens groups, moving through the same river valleys and coastlines in later millennia, left behind the same kind of thin, fragile traces, which means the exact same preservation problem hides a huge slice of our own species' story too. Shelters at these sites were likely closer to tents than fortresses. Branches bent into frames, covered in hide, packed up and carried to the next camp when the season changed. No stone walls. No permanent address. Just a life in motion, chasing resources across an open landscape. Picture a morning at a camp like this. Someone crouched by the water's edge, shaping a stone edge sharp enough to cut hide. Someone else watching a herd move along the far bank, deciding whether today is a hunting day or a moving day. No walls to lean against, no roof overhead. Just open sky, a fire built fresh each evening, and a landscape that had to be read constantly to survive. And coastlines make the missing evidence problem even worse. At the peak of the last ice age, sea levels sat over 100 meters lower than they do today, which means huge stretches of coastline our ancestors actually lived on are now sitting underwater. Researchers studying these drowned landscapes, in places like Doggerland between Britain and mainland Europe, have confirmed entire habitable regions were swallowed by the sea as the glaciers melted, taking any camps built there down with them. So it isn't just that open-air shelters rotted away. In many cases, the very ground they stood on is now beneath the ocean. And here is the twist most people never expect. The Neanderthals at Ein Kashish were doing this right up until close to their disappearance from the region, which means the caveman going extinct in his cave image doesn't hold up either. That is exactly the kind of detail that gets buried when a channel just repeats the popular version of history instead of digging into the actual research. This channel exists to go past the myth and follow what the evidence really shows. So if that's the kind of history you want more of, subscribing means the next deep dive lands directly in front of you. Now, back to the story, because caves were not completely irrelevant. Far from it. So, what were caves actually used for, if not full-time housing? Caves were sheltered during brutal weather, and researchers studying these settlement patterns note that caves were especially valuable for protecting a group's most vulnerable members, the very young, the elderly, and pregnant women, during the roughest stretches of the year. They were also used for food processing and butchery. A cave entrance made a defensible spot to break down a kill, away from hyenas, wolves, and other predators drawn to the smell of fresh meat. And in some remarkable cases, caves were used for something far stranger than shelter. Deep in southwestern France sits Bruniquel Cave, sealed off from the outside world for tens of thousands of years after a rockslide closed its entrance. When researchers finally explored deep inside, more than 300 meters from daylight, they found something nobody expected. Rings built from broken stalagmites, deliberately snapped, arranged, and stacked into circular structures. Two main rings and several smaller piles, built from hundreds of broken stalagmite pieces, the largest ring stretching more than 2.5 meters across. Using uranium series dating, a research team led by Jacques Joubert placed the age of these structures at roughly 176,000 years old. That date matters enormously because modern humans had not even reached Europe yet. The only species that could have built these rings, deep underground, far from sunlight, was the Neanderthal. This was not a cozy living space. Nobody was sleeping, eating, or raising children 3 football fields into total darkness. This looks like a deliberate journey into the depths, for a reason that still is not fully understood. Some researchers point to ritual behavior, others to symbolic meaning we may never fully decode. What is certain is this: caves were not everyday homes. They were destinations, chosen with intent. So here's the bigger idea underneath everything we just covered. The word caveman was never really a description of how ancient humans lived. It is a reflection of what archaeology happened to find first, and what nature happened to let survive. That doesn't mean the theory is a myth everywhere. Think about the two places this video already visited. Ice Age Europe, cold, glacial, short on natural shelter, is exactly where deep cave use shows up most, Bruniquel among them. The warmer, open river valleys of the Levant, like the ground beneath Ein Kashish, tell a different story, one of open camps used across generations. Same species, same basic needs, very different landscapes, and very different choices about when a cave was worth the walk. But the popular idea that ancient humans lived inside caves full-time for the entire span of prehistory simply does not hold up against the evidence in the ground. What actually holds up is a species built for movement, reading rivers and coastlines and herds, ducking into shelter only when the moment truly called for it. The real story of ancient humans is not sealed away in stone chambers. It is scattered across old riverbanks and open plains that never got the chance to survive the way a cave did. Which means the true history of our ancestors is not lost because it wasn't real. It's lost because it was never built to last, not the way stone walls were. Every riverbank camp, every seasonal shelter, every fire built under open sky, existed just as fully as anything found in a cave. The ground simply didn't keep the receipt. So here's a question worth sitting with next time you picture prehistoric life. Now that you know most ancient humans were living in the open, not underground, does that change the picture in your head? And if it does, what other ancient human myth do you want busted next?